Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. G'day everybody and welcome to another episode of Voice of Gord. I have quite a remarkable guest for y'all today. A few months ago I ran into a very interesting young woman on Twitter who referred to herself as the Tiny Bullhauler. We had a few interactions and she struck me as highly interesting, so I invited her on the show. Turns out she lives in upstate New York just like I do and has a very interesting story about how she got into trucking, her family history, going to homeschool, and just her whole life is remarkable in the 21st century. She's just a really nice young chick, and I think you will all enjoy hearing about her. I don't know very much about hauling livestock. It's not something I've ever done. It's not a world I'm connected to. And my guest gives us a little peek into that. If you look in the show notes, I will include links to all of Lora's social media. Follow her adventures across America as she's hauling cows. I think my listeners on Australian On the Road Radio Network, where I'm syndicated, g'day my Antipodean mates. I know a lot more of you fellas haul cattle and sheep, especially over in New Zealand, especially in the outback and various parts of Australia. I think you guys would like hearing from Lora and, a little bit about how things are done on this side of the ocean. And to all my Australian and Kiwi listeners, again, hey, thanks, how's it going? Feel free to contact the show, gordilocks at protonmail.com. My email address is usually in the show notes on every episode. Whether you're listening on Spotify or on autonomoustruckers.substack.com. If you're listening on the road radio, come find me, autonomoustruckers.substack.com. That's where you can find most of my content. Right. Well, I won't hold you up any longer. Let's hear from Lora Andela, the Tiny Bullhauler. G'day everybody, and welcome to another episode of Voice of Gord. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. The other voice you're about to hear is that of a remarkable young woman I met online, who also happens to be a bull hauler. Pulls one of those bull racks with cows or pigs or whatever kind of animal in it. She, like me, lives in upstate New York, and has a very interesting story about how she got into the trucking business and life on the road, as she calls herself the Tiny Bullhauler. Please welcome Lora Andela to the show.
Good morning.
Hey.
So I'm just gonna jump right into it, or?
Well, yeah, you're live, man. What's happening? Where am I finding you this morning?
Well, this morning I'm sitting looking out the view from my bedroom on the farm at home. Everyone else is out milking the cows, doing chores, but I got the morning off.
Right. Yeah, well, we squeeze these shows in when we can. I mean, podcasting as passion project side gig, you sort of fit it in the margins. So you're on a farm. I understand you grew up in a farming family and live in a farming community.
Yes, I grew up, my dad and my grandfather, started with my great-grandfather. They sell hay to horse farms, Long Island. And that's kind of where the trucking came in, because they do all their own trucking. They go down there and they back a 53-foot trailer into these tiny little driveways in the middle of the suburbs where you didn't think a truck would even be allowed to go. And then on the side, they sell beef, which is actually how I met my current boss. He's been buying beef ever since my great-grandfather started the farm. So he's known me since I was a little tiny kid running around the farm. And yeah, one day he called up my dad, said, "I'm looking for a girl to put in my new truck that I got coming." Because he thought the girls did a better job than the men and complained a little less. And I just gotten my license a couple months earlier than that. So my dad said, "Hey, I know a girl with a license." And went in my test drive, bing, bang, boom, got the job offer the same day, and been loving it ever since.
Right. So that's very interesting. I myself have never hauled stock. Um, I'm bumped up close to it. I know a few people who've done it. Hauling livestock is not exactly something you hear about. No offense, rookies just waltzing into a job doing that. Just it's a different kind of trucking. It's its own thing, and your freight is moving like literally back and forth across the trailer. You have to get into some pretty remote spots at times. Uh, Windy little dirt country roads out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
You find yourself working in various weather conditions. Once the cows or pigs are on, you can't really stop. And as I understand it, it's a fairly technical, and it requires a whole lot more effort, thinking, and trucking than the average driving gig.
Yes, definitely. I feel like I'm one of the last people probably to use an atlas on a regular basis. Um, I never go anywhere new without double checking my routes on the atlas for multiple things, not just the bridges, but also those pesky little scale houses. Yeah, I mean, my boss, he started me out slow because he knew, I had experience with cows growing up. But as far as trucking them, he actually started me out doing some loads of pigs and goats. First couple weeks that I was working for him, and then we slowly added on. He had some mixed loads where we had some calves going out to the same place as the pigs, and so he started adding the cattle in. And then before you knew it, I was heading to Oklahoma with a full load of feeder calves.
Right on. And Oklahoma is quite a drive from where you live.
Oh yeah, I think it takes about 22 hours.
Right. And something you mentioned that was interesting is mixed species on board the trailer. Like I say, I'm fairly ignorant of the livestock world, but I didn't realize that you actually put two, three different kinds of animals on the trailer sometimes. Tell us how that works.
Yeah, I don't know if that's like specific to my boss because he does a lot of buying and he'll buy a lot and then he'll sell it out individually. We have a lot of immigrants around us and they have different cultures and different religions and whatnot. So, um, on the same premises as our barn is a rendering plant that my boss's son owns, and so he'll buy a lot of pigs and goats and sheep, and then a lot of the immigrants will come up and they're allowed to butcher the animal themselves, the way that aligns with their culture, their religion, whatever they need. So,
So so the goats are facing Mecca before they get their throat slit.
yes.
Right.
um, but I know that if I were to be going to a slaughterhouse, that wouldn't be allowed to have mixed species on there. But being that it's just coming back to his barn from the barns that he bought them from, I think a couple weeks ago I had a couple cuts of pigs and then like 4 cuts of goats and sheep, and then I also had 6 big bulls in my belly. So
And when you say belly, you don't mean like your stomach. You mean
no.
the bottom part of what in the industry is known as a cattle pot.
Yes, yep. I have 2 large pens in the bottom, in the belly, and then we have the nose, which is the front of the trailer. We have it can be a top and a bottom, but if we have cows, they're a little too tall, so we call it deck the nose, and you can bring that floor for the top one up, just make it a little taller, give them some more room in there, and then 3 smaller pens up on the top, and one little thing called the jailhouse in the back corner, which is just kind of some extra space they had. So they thought, well, we'll put a little pen there, and if you have something small, that's where it can go.
And so the jailhouse is over top of the rear axles.
Yes. Yep.
Right. And so there's drop down ramps to get between the first and second floors on the trailer as well for the animals to run up and down and get in and out.
Yep. Drop down ramps, and then all of them have, a little wall that will come out to the side to make sure there's nowhere that they can slip and fall and get their legs stuck. And it's a lot of moving parts in those trailers, and but you got to use them to your advantage. If you're running a bull up to the front of the trailer and you have 3 gates before you get there, you want to make sure every one of them is set up and ready to go so you can swing it behind him. Make sure you have a wall between you and that animal.
That's correct. A guy I worked with on the ice, his name was Sean. He had a nickname. Was it Golden Tooth or Golden Jaw or something like that? Because his whole bottom row of teeth were all made out of gold. Apparently, when he was hauling stock, he didn't quite get one of those gates closed, and a bull kicked back at the gate, and then the gate took out his lower jaw, and he had to have his jaw rewired back to his face, and all his teeth came out too. So you had to get a whole new set of bottom chompers.
Yeah, it's definitely something you got to watch out for. And when I first started, the cows did make me a little bit nervous just getting in a closed space with them. Um, but I do a lot of old dairy cows that are being sent to the slaughterhouse, and so they're quite gentle. And if I do have some beef cows, you just know keeping. It's just like when you're driving, you always have an exit plan. You
Right.
know, I mean, I can't count how many times I forego the gate to get out, and I just jump right over the fence because it's a little faster than trying to open the door if you're not familiar with it.
Wow. Yeah. And another consideration when you're inside a stock trailer is well, the collection of smells and various things against the walls and on the floors.
Yeah, we have in my little compartment under my bunk there, I have a pair of rubber boots and a set of overalls that anytime I'm going in the trailer, I throw those on. I will never ever wear my truck shoes into the trailer. That's a big no-no.
Yeah. And you mentioned rules about, mixing stock and whatnot. As I understand it, when you go from various farms to kill plants, they want that trailer washed out in between loads to prevent the movement of various bacteria and viruses and nonsense that comes out of the animal's poop, so to speak.
Yeah.
So you're getting your trailer washed quite a bit.
Yeah, typically there's one barn that I go to just about every week out in Michigan, and if it's not super bad, they'll kind of just scoop it out for me. Like if I just have pigs, it never really gets wet. Cows are the ones that make it all wet and sloppy. So they'll shovel it out for me if it's not too bad. But there's always a washout around. They're kind of always little hole in the wall places. But if you know how to find them, then you're good. There's some places that have you wash out your own trailer, but I have been lucky enough to never have experienced that just yet.
Just yet.
Yeah, I assume it'll happen eventually, but for now, I mean, I back in, and it takes them about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending how bad the trailer is, and I'll hop in the bunk and take a nap or get out and socialize with the other cattle haulers that are around.
So you cut something of an interesting figure. Speaking of socializing with other bull haulers, because you're all of about what, 5'2", maybe?
I'm yeah 5'3",
Oh, sorry,
and
didn't mean to rob you of an inch, but your Twitter bio says you're a tiny bull hauler.
yeah 5'3" and 100 pounds soaking wet. So a lot of people are just a little amazed that I can load livestock, and I say you just got to make yourself big. I have a hoodie that I wear when I'm loading if it's not too hot. It's very big and baggy, and I just you gotta wave your arms and yell a lot.
Right. So you're supposed to impose visually on the animals to get them to follow your commands. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, pretty much. Just be loud, try to look big, and if they turn around on you, get out of the way.
Right. Yeah, I spent some time in northern Ontario. I literally lived in the woods, and that's the sort of standard operating procedure if you encounter a black bear as well. Black
Yeah.
black bears do not like noise, and they spook pretty easy. So unless it's a mama bear with her cubs, you can usually just scare them away. Just make yourself big, make yourself loud, get a stick, beat it against a tree. They don't like noise. They don't like any of that stuff. You got into hauling cows after hauling one of their other products. I believe you started hauling milk.
Yep. There's a local company here that I was gonna go to school because I studied for my CDL. I got one of them big study books for about a year before I got it because I was super excited. I knew it was what I wanted to do. So I'd studied for about a year. I was researching different companies, and I didn't really want to go over the road right away if I didn't have to. So I set up to go to a school that's in the area and then got an interview for that local milk company to work in their shop. And I told them, if you're hiring drivers, I'm about to go to school, get my license. And they said, don't waste your money on the school. We'll train you. We'll pay you while we're training you. Just work in the shop for 6 months. And so I got really well acquainted with their equipment, moving it around the yard, backing into garages and whatnot. And then I think I got the job in August of 2020. And then come February of 21, I started going with the trainer and I drove with him for about 3 weeks and he told them, she's pretty much good to go. Like she doesn't need to drive with me if you have someone else to send her with, I can take on the next trainee because she's good to go.
So the company you work for, per our previous phone conversation, it sounds like they're doing things correctly. You spent some time in the shop, you spent time shunting trailers around the yard, you're already fairly familiar with, basic processes like hooking up to trailers, dropping trailers, doing pre-trip inspections, looking for problems with trucks and trailers. The actual seat time of backing trailers up in a yard or just sort of navigating around at low speed is actually fairly invaluable. So it sounds to me like they're doing things correctly. The kind of company you want to sort of go work for if you're new.
Yeah, it definitely is. I actually just recommended for one of my friends to go and work in their shop and do the same thing. As soon as he said he wanted a CDL, I couldn't recommend them enough. New York they changed it to where you have to have a curriculum or go to a school of like either have to go to a school or have a curriculum that's been approved by the DOT. And I know that the guy who trained me had put together a curriculum, but I think ultimately the company decided it was easier to just pay for their employees to go to the school. They don't make you sign any contract to stay on with them afterwards, which is nice. I don't know if they've changed that since they started sending people to the school. Yeah, the trainer, he'll work with anybody, even if you're not sure if you want your CDL, if you're working in the shop and moving stuff around the yard, he's always right there to give you a hand and, give you a couple tips here and there. And he would stay late. Because he was picking up milk during the day from all the farms. But if he, got back at 4 o'clock and you said, hey, I want to work on, my parallel parking, he'd be right there setting up cones in the yard to help you.
That's a good way to learn. I'm happy to know that they're willing to pay someone who's new. They're not signing you into one of these sort of indentured servitude contracts where you sort of have to, or I should say, exclusivity arrangements where you have to keep working for them for 6 months or a year. And I'm really happy to know there are still exceptions to the general rule of new people getting into the business that have to go through some kind of CDL school, possibly with a mega carrier, where either you're going into debt for it or the government's paying it for you. And those two things kind of produce different consequences and different incentives. Whereas, like, if you're getting paid and you really want to be there and the company you work for is giving you that time, they're saying, hey, spend a couple of months in the shop or in the yard first to give you a taste of it and see if you like it and see if you can develop the competencies required before you even go out down the road. That's a testament to them. Good for them.
Yeah, and I cannot recommend enough. Anyone who's looking to get their CDL, go to those local companies, definitely apply to work in their shops if they have any openings, but also, this milk company was not advertising that they would train people to drive. If I hadn't gone in for that interview, which I almost didn't because I was a week away from starting the school and I sat there in my bed that morning going, should I go? Should I not? And I'm so glad I did because I had no idea that they would train people to drive. Yeah, anybody looking to get into it, find your local companies, go to them, ask them if they train to drive or if they'd be willing to train to drive because you save yourself a lot of money. And in my opinion, it's a much better training experience.
Right. Are we allowed to give the guys you worked for props publicly?
Well, I can give you their name and I'll ask. I was actually just over there the other day visiting with them. They're called Alni. They have 3 terminals in New York, locally owned, local family that owns them. Um,
Very
I'm sure.
familiar, very familiar sight on the roads here. I see them all the time when I'm out and about hauling logs. And all night has the milk tanker division, and they haul fuel.
Yep, they haul fuel, and they do have, I think, 2 guys that they haul flatbeds full of propane tanks. I don't see them too often. I don't know where they go, what they do, but it's always a little interesting mix-up when you see them.
Props to Alni for doing things correctly. I might have to get whoever is in charge over there on the show to discuss their program and why it is they're continuing to buck a fairly negative trend you see in other parts of the business. Good for them. That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure they would love that. I actually did a news story. It was my last couple days working for them before I went to go haul cattle, and they were very excited about that. So I'm sure they would love to be mentioned here on the show.
There's a photo. Apparently, there's a one of your milk customers has quite a social media presence, and threw a photo of you up that I guess you could say it went fairly viral.
Yes, she asked to take my picture. And you don't always see farmers when you're around. So I'd been to the farm a couple times. I just hadn't run into anybody. And um, that day, Miss Lorraine, she's a farmer and she's a lawyer advocating for ag families and for getting whole milk back in schools and that kind of thing. And she's like, "Can I take your picture for Twitter?" And I said, "Sure." And I never really used Twitter, so she told me what her handle was. It's NY Farmer, and I went and looked her up later that day, and turns out she had 35,000 followers. I think she's over 40,000 now. But yeah, and then I retweeted that photo and said, "Hey, look, it's me." And she saw that comment and said, "Our milk truck driver found us on Twitter." And from there, I mean, I've gained a couple hundred followers, and every time I post a picture of my truck, I get a couple more.
Yeah, well, truck photos and hot girl selfies are always a good combination. Hauling milk it up so there's a little thing that goes on in upstate New York that is somewhat mysterious to people in other parts of the country. New York has these things called R permits, which allow
Yeah.
you to go way overweight on trucks and trailers with divisible loads you'd normally not get a permit for. Like, people that haul oversized, you're hauling an excavator or some heavy piece of equipment, you get your over dimensional permit, and then that allows you a whole bunch of extra weight because there's nothing you can do. You can't take the machine apart. And so typically that's what you get overweight permits for. But New York, you can basically get an overweight permit for anything. And you see these guys running around with a standard 5 axle, tandem drive tractor and a tandem trailer, and you can go up to 102,000 pounds. You can have a 4 axle trailer and go up to 117. And that's pretty common here in New York. So every now and then you'll say something like, "Hey, I've got 60, 70,000 pounds on," and alarm bells start going off in the minds of other truck drivers who aren't quite used to that.
Yeah, the standard milk trailer that we had on the lot would hold 71,500 pounds of milk. And more often than not, we filled them right up to the top. We actually have a little switch on the top where we can get up and open the hatch and watch it as it fills up, and then hit that switch to kill the pump when it gets up there.
All right.
Unless you
So
have
do the milk tankers not have overfill sensors like fuel trailers do?
no, at least not the ones we had. It's really fun if you have a hydraulic trailer because that means the lever is on the back and there is no kill switch on top. So you kind of got to gauge until you have about 10 seconds of time left and then book it down the ladder to the back of the trailer to turn it off.
Yeah, unless you want to give the trailer a milk bath.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done that. I think everyone who picks up milk has done that at some point.
It's biodegradable. It's just compost. It's all good.
Yeah,
But yeah,
exactly.
for again, so your little career trajectory here since you started only fairly recently to go straight into pulling 100,000 pounds around, especially. So the thing with milk tankers and other food grade tanker trailers is there's no baffles inside them, right? So there's nothing really to restrict the product from sloshing around. So I guess you would want to keep the trailer corked to reduce the slosh and thus reduce the truck and trailer getting pushed around every time you go around a corner. And like dairy country, and most of a lot of upstate New York is actually quite hilly until you get close to Lake Ontario, and then it sort of turns into the Lake Ontario sort of floodplains there, like kind of along Syracuse and Rochester and all that. But the rest of the state is sort of the northern end of Appalachia. So you're running around at 20,000 pounds more than a standard semi, and it's also sloshing around and moving. So, I mean, if that's your first trucking gig, I mean, you're getting thrown right off the deep end without any water wings.
Yeah, and I think it's actually it's funny. I think the local company is the way to go to for training because it kind of eases you into it. And I think doing farm pickup with milk is another really good way to just kind of ease into it because you start out empty. And then as you go, you're adding, depending on how big your farms are, you might add 5,000 pounds, you might add only 1,000 pounds, you might add 12,000 pounds. But as you go through the day, you're kind of getting a feel for how much slosh there is with how much weight there is. I know that we have some delivery trailers. We'll pump it off of a farm pickup trailer onto a delivery trailer, and that's just a straight. The pickup trailers have two compartments, so it's at least a little bit cut down. But some of these delivery trailers are just single bore, open all the way through, and those you definitely. I think it was an uncle who used to haul milk, and he got down to New York City delivering, and traffic stopped up real fast, and he's grabbed his gears and slammed his brakes, and he got stopped. And just as he took that breath of like, whew, I made it, that milk sloshed. And it doesn't matter if your brakes are set, that will push you another 20, 30 feet forward.
Yeah, that's doesn't sound like fun. I haven't done much in the way of food grade. My only experience with smoothbore tankers, these guys I worked for in Syracuse would haul biodiesel or biodiesel feedstock on occasion. So they had bought these like trailers that would have been built for hauling vegetable oil.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go to, I used to do a farm pickup. There was a customer we had kind of along 88, sort of over towards Albany.
Okay.
And I can't remember the name of the town, but the guy had a small business where he went around to all the local restaurants and various other places and picked up all their waste vegetable oil. And in his barn, he had built like an initial screening and storage system. So he had a little tiny single axle truck with a small tank on it and a pump, and he would go around, pick up all the vegetable oil and other waste food oils, bring it back to his barn, pump it into his tank, run it through a initial filtration screening system, and then store it in his barn. And once he got up to like 7,500 gallons, he would call us and we would come pick it up and take it to another plant in Rhode Island, of all places, to turn it into biodiesel.
I've been to Rhode Island a few times actually with the livestock trailers. That's where most of all the goats and sheep that don't get brought out individually end up there usually. And that's in a little suburb of Providence. And you would never think that trucks are allowed down that street. The first time I went, I thought there's no way I'm not gonna take out this telephone pole, but I made it.
Right. And so what about this place in Rhode Island? Why is it they like the goats?
I'm not really sure. They call themselves beef and veal, and we take them a couple calves every now and then too. They just they really like the goats. They want them there first thing Monday morning.
Right. And any vegetarians or vegans listening to this show, sorry about your luck.
Oh,
What?
I just had a vegan coming after me on Twitter, and I thought you can, talk about how you feel and whatnot, but I don't think you're going to change any minds on this page.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, fair props to them for going, coming right to the heart of it. So you've been to Rhode Island, Oklahoma. How many states have you got covered so far?
Oh, I haven't counted them out. Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, and of course New York.
That's not bad. That's pretty good traveling so far. And I'm like I say, I'm pretty impressed with your sort of career trajectory, as it were. Basically, starting out learning appropriate, correct way, keeping it local, and then going into actually a job which requires a fair amount of competence, skill, and caution, and then moving into hauling livestock, which is something I've never done myself. So that's all very interesting. And like, where do you see yourself? Are you're going to keep trucking for a while? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the plan. I suppose one day if we decide to settle down and pop out some babies, I'll come off the road at least for a little while. Um, Yeah, it's actually, I mean, I got very lucky to get the job that I have because, I mean, I was appreciative to be local. I definitely wanted to, go over the road and see a little more of the country, but I didn't know how I felt about being away from home for, weeks and months at a time. Props to everyone who does that. I know that's not easy. And so I thought it would be at least 5 to 10 years before I could find a job that, paid me well enough and I got to go out, see more of the country, but still be home a decent amount. But I'm home, during the busy season, I still get home at least one night a week, if not two. And then during the off season, we pretty much have one run out to Michigan. I leave Thursday, get back Saturday, and I might have some local stuff the rest of the week, but for the most part, I'm home 4 days a week.
That's not a bad gig.
Yeah, and a lot of people say, livestock haulers, they go, 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 go. And, during our busy season, definitely. My boss always tells me he has enough work for two people, and I say, well, you have one, so let's slow down just a little bit till we find someone else. I'm not sure if we slow down because the actual business slows down, but I know that he has quite a few feeder calves that he keeps on a couple different properties, and he's got to make hay and get things planted and whatnot for them.
Right. And so you mentioned your family farm selling hay down to Long Island. Have you gone to help them out with that?
Yes, I've gone a couple times as a teenager. It's a lot of work for a little girl because it's all small bales that we unload by hand and stack up in each individual barn for them. And I mean, they sell them by the ton, so they like their bales to weigh, as 60, 70, 80 pounds as they can get them.
Right. But like, I mean, have you trucked them down since you've got your license and been on the road?
Oh no. I've driven in New York City in my car a couple times, going to Long Island I have family down there as well. And I don't think I would enjoy driving a truck down that way.
Well,
Props to my dad and grandpa.
yeah, I've been through the city a few times. I used to go to New Jersey constantly. I used to have a customer sort of about a third of the way out on Long Island that I was hauling chemicals for the same guys in Syracuse. Yeah, New York's the kind of place you go, you try and go in and out at night when you can, or very, very early in the morning. It's a bit hectic, but I mean, if you're going out to Long Island, you just have to sort of, scoot across the Cross Bronx Expressway at 4 in the morning, get over the Throgs Neck Bridge, and then hit 495. And like I say, as long as you do it early, you're not too bad.
Yeah, I know they usually leave, like 5 or 6 in the evening, and it takes about 5 hours, 5.5 hours to get down there. So they'll get down there around midnight and get to their first stop and just park there, and then just start unloading. 5, 6 in the morning. Work. They usually go as far out as they can. Sometimes they have 6 stops. Sometimes they have like 17 stops. So they'll go to the farthest one and then just work their way back across the island.
That's interesting that they have this gig, then they have this customer base specifically on Long Island. Is there something about the hay that the horses out there really enjoy it?
Yeah, I mean, my great grandfather started it and he grew up in New Jersey. So I think he just had the idea that, he's going to start a farm. And there's a lot of horse people who, they need their hay to be of a certain quality. And I mean, that's definitely the difference between like my boyfriend's dairy farm and my dad's hay farm is, we'll cut hay and if it gets rained on, it's not a huge deal because we can chop it or make it into, wet bales. Whereas my dad, he really needs that hay to be as dry as possible because he needs it to be of a certain quality and a certain standard for those horses. I mean, we're talking horses that cost more than my car. But yeah, my great grandfather started it and my grandpa and my dad run it now and they've just been able to retain a huge customer base down there. That's how my dad met my mom. She was working on one of the horse farms. And yeah, I mean, a lot of our customers are just about as close as family to us now because we've been selling hay to them for 40 years.
Yeah, that's the kind of good business relationship and trucking gig that you want, where you're hauling your own freight, or at least you're only one step away from the customer. There's no brokers involved, and then you know all of your customers very well. You know what they need, you know where they are, you know all the locations, and it's just a better way of doing business rather than having a zillion middlemen. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's your career trajectory. A is really good. B, it's somewhat unique, and C, it's been good for you that you've had not had to deal with the freight market and the sort of negative aspects of that, right? Like I used to haul farm equipment on flatbeds when I was younger. There used to be a case plant in Hamilton, and they would make new disc harrows and seeders, and then they had a plant that just stamped out new discs, and I would take replacement discs all across the prairie. There was another company in Niagara Falls, Ontario, that was importing Swedish farm equipment, and we would take that and deliver it all across the prairie. And sometimes I would have like a 53-foot step deck, everything stacked in crates or whatever. I'd have 17, 18 deliveries between Manitoba and Alberta, or across the US, Iowa, Nebraska. When you're dealing with farm people in the agricultural industry, like everybody's always happy to see you, they want their stuff, you never get held up. They'll usually send somebody out with a forklift right away, and then they'll give you directions to the next spot. If you're going to be late, they'll call the guy down the road and say, "Hey, we've got a truck coming to you." Everybody's cooperative, everyone's friendly, and then you hook up to a box trailer and you haul a load of freight somewhere, and you show up at some huge distribution center. Nobody knows you, nobody cares. You could be on time. They might not give you a door for several hours. They might not get you unloaded until the next day. Absolutely nobody gives a shit. All of your time is usually not compensated, and it's just terrible, and it's bad for your mental health. It makes you feel like nothing, and I don't know how anybody would ever go from hauling agriculture to hauling freight. Like that's like a regression. So you dodged a bullet and you went straight to the good stuff. So good for you.
Yeah, that was one thing when I got my license. I was looking into it. I didn't think agricultural specifically, um, but I feel like it just kind of went that way because it's the industry I'm familiar with. But I knew I never wanted to haul any, just dry van, just reefer, bumping docks. I knew I wanted to do something a little bit out of the ordinary. And like you were saying with the farmers, I mean, picking up milk, I never had my own route, because I was new in the job, so I was just kind of covering for whoever was off that day. Um, and I still have all the farmers' phone numbers in my phone because you got to be able to communicate if you're going to be late and whatnot. And even now, when I haul the livestock, I mean, yeah, I am a company driver, but at the same time, I'm also the only driver. So, I have a very, how do I put this? Just a lot of trust and respect between my boss and me. He doesn't look at it as me working for him. He looks at we work together. Um, I work with him. And when I leave on a trip, I mean, he'll give me the basic rundown if I have multiple stops or not. And then he says, "No news is good news. I'll see you in 5 days. Call me if you need anything." And off I go, and I have the customer's phone numbers, and I'm the point of contact for them. I let them know when I'm going to be there. They let me know if there's anything going on in the yard that I need to know about, and they have the order all ready for me to pick up and get everything to come back. It's very, very streamlined. And I feel like it's the closest thing I'll ever get to like the old school trucking where you don't have somebody bugging you all the time through an ELD or calling you all the time. Plus I get to use paper logs, so that's fun. I've never actually had to adhere to the
Good for you. Yeah, you got the agricultural exemption. Or is
yeah.
it specifically to livestock? I can't remember.
So the paper logs is specifically to livestock. The milk company, I did use an ELD, but we would log in, and when we would just hit ag exempt and we logged in, and it would not count our hours. So
Right. Well, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that sort of relationship where you're the sole driver for an owner operator. It's a single truck company. I was in the same position once. I worked for, again, a farmer in Alberta who I met up on the ice. His name's Jim Langell. Very nice man. He's probably one of the longest serving guys on the ice. He went up north every winter for 20 plus years. I got to know him. I've been to his farm several times, and we moved on from working on the ice to this fuel distribution company in Edmonton. And I drove his truck with his fuel tankers for these guys in Edmonton. But like, I worked for Jim, it was his truck. But like, I had to have the mentality that like, he's on his farm way down in Rolling Hills in southern Alberta, and I'm up north. So he can't help me with anything, right? So if the truck breaks down or there's a problem, it's on me. So I had to have the owner operator mentality of drive slow, save fuel, grease the truck every week, look after things, treat the truck correctly, maintain it. I was doing the oil changes myself at this place in Edmonton, I found. And then I also dealt directly with the customers because Jim was on his farm and like I would only hear from him once a week because like what's he gonna do? He's on his farm. He's not up there dealing with the fuel company's customers out in the bush. So basically, I was running the ship. I was essentially running that part of his business for him, right? And he paid me very handsomely. There's a value. There's you derive something from that responsibility. Like it gives you feel some pride in it, and you take a lot more ownership of the situation when you're in that position than when, say, you're working for a company with 500 trucks and a huge dispatch office and a human resources Harridan wondering why you went 10 minutes over on your ELD. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a different kettle of fish, and that's my preferred form of trucking.
Yeah, for sure. And when you say like, you take a little more ownership, I mean, my truck is it is my truck, I mean, when we bought it, it had 200 miles on it. And so it's been my truck, since it was brand new. Um, and when I'm out there, I'm always looking for the lowest fuel prices. I don't really have brand loyalty to any specific fuel stop. As long as they're the lowest one, then that's that's the one I'm going to go to. And I mean, when I'm off for a couple days, if the truck needs to go in for a service, gets tires rotated, if he doesn't have anybody around who can take it down, I'll always come in and take it down, make sure it gets done what it needs done.
The whole part about being an operator is also maintaining the equipment. I can be a little bit harsh on how the industry flings meat into the grinder, so to speak, as far as like churning through drivers. It has a real bad retention problem. And part of the reason for that is because they don't, the industry at large doesn't have your boss's mentality about, according a professional driver the responsibility to look after the equipment and the confidence that they're going to get the job done and hiring the type of person such as yourself that's going to do it. These larger companies, they just don't see it that way. It's just get a bum in a seat and, lowest common denominator. And that puts a lot of people out on the road who probably shouldn't be. And I have a simple heuristic. If before you even go to CDL school, before you get out on the road, before you take a road test, here's a grease gun.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't or won't or don't want to be taught how to get underneath a truck and grease it, then you don't get a license. Step
Yeah.
one, maintain the equipment. If you can't get underneath the truck and grease the drive shaft once a week, then you don't get a CDL. Bye. Like obvious exceptions. Like if you've got some kind of injury or disability or whatever, fine. But like for the vast majority of people, it's not that difficult a job, and it shows that you care. If you're actually willing to do that, it also means you're going to be willing to get underneath and address problems. It shows some effort, and it's pretty basic. It's not that hard to do, right? And so, like I say, you need to approach the job in a sort of holistic manner. You have to be like concerned about your customers, concerned about the people that own the truck, concerned about the truck, because hey, this is how you're getting paid. This is how you're making money. And the more miles the truck makes, the more money you make. Everybody's happy. Maintain the equipment. That's how you get down the road. It's a machine. It's going to break down. It's going to have problems. You have to treat it accordingly, which includes being able to do basic maintenance.
Yeah, and I feel like those big name companies have really kind of killed that. I mean, I've seen so many pictures on Facebook of, someone who had to call roadside just to change a marker light because their company won't let them touch anything and they could lose their job if they do so much as trying to change the light. And I can't imagine. I have way too many marker lights on my trailer. If I got fired for changing them, I would have been fired 20 times over by now.
Oh, so you've got one of those fancy bull racks with a gazillion lights on it.
Yes, sir.
So have you figured out? So tell me some more about bull hauler culture, because like I said, I've never hauled livestock. That's part of one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. I don't, I tried to get a job in one of my many journeys down to Australia. I ran around with these guys that were hauling cattle in the Northern Territory, and I learned a little bit about it from them. But how it's done here and how it's done there are different things, and I really don't know anything about American bull hauling culture other than, like, for the most part, they have nicer looking trucks, they work a lot harder, and they're maintaining the sort of old school, legit independent spirit that used to be the norm in trucking at one time. But I don't know the sort of nitty gritty or the details. Is there anything you can share with us about that?
I mean, we're a little bit like outlaws, but also a little bit outcasts. Nobody wants us to park next to them at a truck stop. I mean, if we're loaded, especially, I wouldn't want to do that to anybody, because those animals get loud. And if we're empty and we haven't hit a washout yet, then it's pretty smelly. So we sleep. I personally haven't slept on any ramps, but I've seen a lot of cattle trucks parked on the ramps. We sleep at the sale barns a lot. Um, the one I go to out in Kansas all the time, and a lot of times I'll get there early afternoon, the day of the sale, and if it's not over till 2 a.m., I'll wake up the next morning to load, and there's 11 other trucks that showed up overnight. But everybody's sleeping there because nobody else wants us to park around them. Um,
Right.
so it
That's
does kind of.
so, speaking about that, if I might make a diversion here,
Mhm.
a big problem in the trucking business, especially in the sort of media and social media of trucking, is the lack of parking. There's a bill before Congress to try and get more funds to build more rest areas. And, I have a friend back home in Saskatchewan who's, his second job is basically lobbying the government to try and build more rest areas because there's just basically nowhere to park in lots of Saskatchewan. But something I noticed, and I think is still a thing, especially in the sort of central plains, west Midwest, as it were, of the United States, is you get out into smaller towns and into places like off the interstate, and there are more, like you say, you slept at a sale barn. There's places with little frontage roads. The truck stops are a little bit different. I mean, I get the feeling like that's not as huge of an issue, especially if you're in the agriculture business and you know where to go on the plains. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, definitely. And it's a little bit of a motivating point to kind of get where you're going. Because if you can make it to the sale barn, you have a place to park for sure. And yeah, the truck stops out there definitely. I mean, you have in your bigger towns like Emporia, Kansas, there's a Flying J that's just like every other one. It's filled up by 3, 4 p.m. But then, I mean, you hop over, I think it's 20 miles east of there, and there's a TA, and their concrete parking lot is not huge, but they have a dirt lot out back that I have never seen filled up because it's just so huge. But nobody wants to drive the extra 20 miles, or they can't if they don't have time on their clock.
Right. So sale barns, and what? How do things go? Do you deliver to many kill plants at all, like where they process the animals?
A decent amount. Some we have like a local load of cows that'll go down. If it's too many to fit in the gooseneck, sometimes they'll call me up and ask if I want to take it down in the pot. When I go out to Kansas and Oklahoma, I'll take feeder calves out, and then on the way back, I typically pick up a load of old dairy cows or beef cows that are being culled, and I'll bring them back here to Pennsylvania to the plant.
Right. Is that the one down there in Wyalusing?
Yes,
Right. I've been
Cargill.
there. Yeah. I used to haul propane there. I used to fill up the propane tanks for all of their forklifts.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the cages for the tanks is where part of the plant where they like take all the hides off, and
Yep.
then they stack up the hides and sell them to people that are making leather or whatever. Oh man, yeah, I hated going there. It always stank. I can sort of see why, the sort of bull haulers might be more of a a brotherhood, not to be exclusionary of the sisters, but like,
Yeah.
there's probably a bit of camaraderie there, like you say, because everywhere you go, nobody wants a cow next to them while they're trying to sleep. Nobody wants a stinky, unwashed cattle trailer. I'm sure nobody wants you driving through their neighborhood or anything like that. Um, I think I recall one time a post you made on Twitter about guys not flicking their lights on and off. Was that specific? Were you annoyed at other bull haulers, or was that like trucking in general?
Yeah, that was actually my next point to bring up. I've seen other trucks do it, but for the most part, it's bull haulers. When we pass each other on the highway, we'll hit the button to just blink our lights on and off. Just kind of like to say hello. And, sometimes we'll call out on the CB. Sometimes it's just a blink and move on with your day. But it always, warms my heart a little bit. It makes me feel like, oh, we're not really alone out here. Like there's how many others out here doing the same thing we're doing right now. We're all separate, but all together on the road at the same time. And I went through about 3 weeks where all of a sudden like nobody was blinking back, and every now and then you get somebody who doesn't blink back, and I've done it sometimes if I got a slice of pizza in my hand or something, I can't get to the button. um, but yeah, it was about 3 weeks where just nobody blinked back. I mean, there were 6 trucks in a row in one night that I passed them all within about an hour of each other, and just nobody was blinking back. And I was like, dang, did something happen like where like word got around about me specifically, nobody wants to blink back, or just maybe it's just the people in this area don't really do that too much.
Yeah, just distracted by something. Well, the thing with cattle trailers is the lights, the configuration of the lights, so you can sort of see them from a mile away, and the construction of the trailers themselves, because they're kind of like they got a zillion holes down the side, so you can't really paint them or put striping or a big mural or the name of your company. So most cattle trailers have that little lit up sign on the front. It'll
Yeah.
have the name of the farm or the trucking company, and it's lit up, and it's on the very front of the trailer above the truck, so you can always spot them coming a mile away. So like you guys are really easy to see.
Yeah. And I think we do that because we pass a lot of people. So when you get a lot of bright lights in your rear view mirror, that means move over, we're coming through.
Yeah, there's usually a time pressure too, right? Like if you've got live animals on board, there's a certain delivery window, and then like if you're on the road longer than a certain amount of hours, you have to let them off to feed and water them and then put them back on the trailer again, which is something I think you guys try to avoid.
Yeah, they can be on for 28 hours before you have to stop and let them off. So I think that's why we only go as far as Oklahoma and Kansas, because it takes about 22 hours to get out there. And when you mix in because you have the 150-mile ag exempt radius from the point that you loaded and from your destination. So, with those and with paper logs, you can kind of shimmy it around and make it look all right.
Right. So the 150 miles. So what does that mean? Does that mean you don't have to log the first 150 miles you leave and the last 150 miles before your delivery?
So it's an air mile radius. So I actually, I get on my phone and I know when I'm leaving here where the radius ends. But I'll get on my phone and look up my destination, and there's a website that does different air mile radius map. So I put in the town where I'm dropping off and hit 150, and then I look at the highway I'm taking and say, okay, so about this exit near this town is when I can stop counting my hours. So
Right.
sometimes it's the last, if I have some zigzagging in the end to do, sometimes it's, upwards of 200 miles of the end of the trip, but it's within that radius, so it still counts.
Right. So that's how the livestock exemption functions. Point A and point B have a radius around them where your trucking doesn't count.
Yes, and I believe it used to be that, if I was picking up, a lot of times I'll leave out of here, we're near Utica, and I have a stop by Buffalo that I'll usually, I'll drop off something, pick up something, and continue on to Michigan. And it used to be that they didn't specify which loading point. So I could have done the 150 exempt from my starting point here in Utica, and then continued that, using the Buffalo stop as another 150. And basically, I would have been able to make almost the whole trip without counting any hours. But they have changed that a year or two ago, I believe, to say your first loading point is where it counts from. If you have multiple loading points, you have to count it from your first loading
Right.
point.
I was gonna say if you're peddling livestock LTL with that kind of exemption, you could just basically keep going if you did it
Yeah,
correctly. Yeah, I
yeah,
was gonna say Utica to Buffalo is only that'd be
three
about what 100.
hours.
It's right around 150 miles, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, inside info. That's very interesting. I wish I don't have to worry about it. I work within my own 150-mile exemption in that I never exceed that. Logs are certain commodities, logs, milk, certain bulk commodities that have yet to be value added or processed, as it were. The further they go, the more they cost, right? So, like typically, logs and forestry products, like you don't ship them too far. The logs go to the mill. I mean, once it's sawn timber, who knows where it ends up, especially if it gets put on a train or something like they come down from Canada. But you don't want to ship logs too far because the more you ship them, the more expensive the wood becomes.
Mm.
And dairy, dairy products, same thing. Every the further you have to ship the milk, the more it costs. So basically, all your dairy milk processing facilities, they pick up from farms locally. They're not getting it shipped very far, right?
Yeah, and I think everybody kind of, from the farmer to the consumer kind of prefers that anyway, because they like to know where their milk comes from and know that it's local.
For the most part, yeah. So tell me a little bit more about like I think you're a localism respecter, and I believe you also said you were homeschooled. So and you seem to be quite happy about where you live, which thumbs up for me on all of those things. Do you mind speaking a little bit about exactly where you live, or like what about it you like so much? And you're
Um,
growing up, like just your background growing up before you got into trucking?
yeah, so I grew up in the town of West Exeter, or outside of town, I suppose, which is a little tiny town about half hour south of Utica. Like I said, we grew up, baling hay, and from the time I was 10 years old, we were helping kick hay off the wagons and getting it stacked up in the hay mows and whatnot. And we raised the beef on the side, so I was always in charge of the babies because we have actual beef like Angus, Hereford, Simmental mix that we've kind of curated our own herd over the last 20, 30 years. And then we would also get Holstein bulls from one of the local dairy farms. And so we would raise them on the bottles. And those were my responsibility from, I believe I was 8 years old. And I said, my brother gets to do chores. I want to do chores too. About 3 years later, I was regretting that, having to get up every morning, rain or shine. Yeah, I mean, we would ride along with dad and grandpa in the trucks. I think less than a year ago, I hopped in the truck with my dad because he was running around where I live. And so I met up with him and got in the truck with him for the day. He was hauling round bales. So I grew up, graduated from homeschool. I was homeschooled K through 12, never went to public school. Then I graduated, went to college, thought nothing here is really piquing my interest, so I'm just going to go to work. And the trucking was always my backup plan.
What did you take in college?
Oh, a little bit of everything. I started out with like an EMT paramedic. I wasn't 18 yet, so I couldn't actually be in that major, but I kind of had classes that were aiming that way. Um, and then as I was thinking about it, I was like, I don't think I'm really cut out for EMT paramedic. Like helping people, that sounds great, but I don't know if I could handle, inevitably the people that I couldn't save. So I
Well,
switched.
there's a certain with the EMT thing, like no offense to the people that do it or those they're helping, but there's a certain ick factor with like blood and people that are injured or having a problem. But to not do that and then haul livestock that are kind of shitting all over the place,
Yeah.
you could say they're in a similar sort of zone, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, from there I switched and I took a hard left turn into travel and events management, which I enjoyed those classes, but then the teacher was retiring right after that semester and they were discontinuing the major. And I thought, well, why did you let me, join into this major if it's being discontinued after this semester? And then I did 2 years of business administration or not 2 years, 2 semesters, my bad. 2 semesters of business administration, and I had 7 classes left, and you need 4 classes a semester to be full-time. So that left me with 4 and 3. And I asked if I could take an extra class to fill in that last spot, and they said, no, you can't take any classes outside of the major if they're unnecessary. And I said, well, can I apply to overload and, take all 7 in one semester? And they said, no, that's too many. You can only go up to 6. So I said, well, if I'm not going to get the financial aid to help me pay for it, then I think I'm just gonna, maybe I'll finish it later in life. And I went and I started working for U-Haul, worked there for 3 years, and then got my CDL. That's how I ended up where I live now. Right before, 3 days before I left milk to haul livestock, one of the farmers very politely, very timidly asked me out for drinks and dinner. It was the first proper real date that I've ever been taken on. And yeah, we've been together ever since. We're coming up on 2 years. We moved in together just under a year ago up on this farm here. And I love having access to the outdoors. Being able to walk out the door and go up we live on the tallest hill in the county, so that's a huge perk too. We can see well, we can't see the whole valley today with this smoke that's blowing in. But it's peaceful. It's nice.
It's interesting that so you were homeschooled. Was that like at a community homeschool with a bunch of other kids, or like just literally at your house?
For the most part at my house, but we had different co-ops and things. We had a gym program that we would go to once a week with a bunch of other kids, and we did a lot of our own co-op. We started out with kind of just attending the local co-ops, and we kind of made our own with a bunch of our close friends. And I really like having the kind of the control over the education, because it was like I got to pick what I wanted to do for science. So I took marine biology just because I thought it would be cool. One of our co-ops, we decided for history we were going to study the Renaissance, and what we did was the first half of the school year is we studied the Renaissance as a group, once or twice a week. And then for the second half of the school year, we were preparing and putting on a Renaissance fair, a homeschool Renaissance fair, of which we had hundreds of attendees from all across the state. So that was like really, really cool to have done. We ended the day with a Renaissance style banquet. We made our own clothes of the era to wear both for the fair and for the banquet. It was interesting for sure.
I see. I'm picking up a through line, sort of in your life and in the conversation here. You were homeschooled, which you guys seem to have taken to with vigor, and organizing all of your own activities, courses of study, things you want to do. And then you go to college and they kind of jerk you around, and it has to be this way and only this way. Then you get into trucking and you somehow manage to go back to having your own choice, and working with people that like grant you the responsibility to sort of do your own thing in an industry where there's a lot of people that don't get to do that. The trend is towards micromanagement. The trend is towards ELDs, our entire industry being run to suit the fears of actuarial nerds working for insurance companies, and nobody actually doing anything about the actual problems, but just, throwing more technology and throwing more regulation and everything. And your life thus far seems to be this interesting dance getting around all of this stuff in your school and in your career. And I think that's awesome. And I'm glad these exemptions exist. But to me, it sort of seems to me like your life and the way your family and how you have done things in school and in the trucking industry should be the norm. And it's a real shame that it isn't.
I know there's a huge uptick in homeschooling lately. I believe on both sides of the political spectrum, as some states are forcing certain curriculums and some states are banning certain curriculums. A lot of people are pulling their kids out in homeschooling. And while I can't say, for political reasons, whether or not that's a good or bad idea, I do think having the freedom of, expanding your kids' learning style, because it really gives a more individualized learning plan. If you're more hands-on, you can do more hands-on things. If you learn just from reading a textbook, you can do that. My mom taught us, she said, if I haven't taught you how to teach yourself, then I've taught you nothing. So she always, always, always made sure that we knew, and I mean, we didn't even have internet growing up. So it was, you find the encyclopedias and you go looking for books that will tell you what you need to know, and you make sure you check your sources. If you're reading a news article, make sure you know whether or not it's an opinion piece or if it actually has references.
That's
Um,
actually a remarkable thing you just said. I don't know that we've got to your age yet. Maybe I forgot somewhere earlier in the conversation, but you're only 24 years old.
I turned 24 today.
Oh, happy birthday! I had no
Thank you.
idea. No, well, you just mentioned that you didn't have internet. I don't know if that was like a choice or what, but like to have been born, so you would have been born in 1999 then.
Yes.
By then, I mean the internet was still not quite its infancy as far as how long around it has been, but like it still wasn't massively publicly uptaken as it is today. And to have grown up through the aughts and the teens without having used the internet at all is especially living in the United States, that's quite remarkable.
Yeah, my parents actually just got high-speed internet, I think a year or two ago. I guess, when it first became a thing, the high-speed internet companies came through and they asked everybody, do you want internet? We'll put up the lines and get you connected. And it was all farmers. And they said, what do we need that for? And then they just never, they never came back. They never came and asked again. Um,
What do we need that for? Indeed.
he, so we had dial up, but I mean, other than my mom going to, she'd check her email, once or twice a week. Other than that, we never really used it for anything. We had the old computers with it's a foot and a half long square monitor. And we had, CD programs that you would load onto it for like typing classes. So we knew how to use the computer, but other than solitaire and pinball, there wasn't much else we could do.
I mean, it is a good resource and it is good to have around. That's how we're having this conversation. That's how I'm able to have this podcast. That's how we found each other. So you mentioned you like to be on the lookout for cheap fuel. If you're ever down in my part of the state, there's a little place in Owego, New York, called Scott Smith and Sons Fuel. Probably they're always 50 to 70 cents a gallon cheaper than everywhere else. They're like a little card lock type deal. You got to get
Okay.
off 17. It's a bit of a pain in the butt to get in there, but it's worth it.
Well, I actually drive straight through Owego when I'm coming up from Wyalusing there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. If you go to Wyalusing, yeah, it's not too far away.
Yeah, because I typically go up to Dryden after that, and that's just the quickest way to get up and through. The first time I thought, oh, am I not supposed to go this way? But I saw the sign saying truck route, and I said, well, if they say I can go here, then I'm gonna go
Yeah,
here.
well, the thing with Owego is they've got the Tioga County Courthouse and that sort of like one-way loop thingy around it. And
Yeah,
then you have to make that real tight right and a tight left to get on 38 and 96 coming north. But once you're on that, you're fine. And actually, 38's a nice little drive. I've been using it a
yeah,
lot lately. One of my customers is on 96 just south of Candor, and they've had to degrade a bunch of their logs, whatever, and I've been hauling them up to Syracuse. So I come down almost into Owego and then blast up 38 through Dryden and then the back way behind Cortland and Homer and Preble. And I continue, I stay on 281 and then I go through Tully and swing out towards Fabius and take all back roads to Jamesville just because too many opportunities to deal with the government on 81. New
yeah,
York, New York State doesn't have a whole lot in the way of like permanent way stations. They've only got a couple, and most of them are on 81. One's right there just north of Tully, another one at the state line with Pennsylvania, and then there's that Preble rest area where they seem to like have big parties all the time. So I like to be a 2-lane tourist, and New York State takes a lot out of us in taxes already, so I'd rather not deal with them voluntarily. But anyway, yeah, I drive through Dryden all the time too.
yeah. I'm a big fan of the scenic routes. That trucker path has been really helpful to let me know whether or not scales are open because I mean I can plan to go around the scales anyway, but if I know for a fact that they're closed, that's really helpful. That's when I go out west, I leave on a Sunday, so everything's closed, and I can typically make it all the way into Kansas or into Oklahoma and pass the last scale in Missouri, and then I'll stop and take my nap once I get clear of everybody. Because
Right.
usually I'm getting past them right before they're getting ready to open up for Monday morning.
Have you, in your travels west, you said you sleep at sale yards or sale barns a lot. You deal with other bull haulers. Have any of the West guys ever tried to like poach you or offer you a job?
No, I've had a couple people on Twitter, grain haulers, and somebody in California who does wine tankers. I said I'm staying far away from that state. Um, but yeah, none of the other bull haulers have offered me a job. I don't know that I've met too many owner operators who do it. I meet a lot of people, or if they are owner operators, they're pulling a trailer for a certain farm or a certain feedlot. But yeah, I think a lot of them are actually a little bit scared to talk to me. Um,
Wow. Why would they be afraid to speak with you? You strike me as this like very earnest and forthright and friendly chick. Like what's to be afraid of? And you're pretty small. It's not like you're, physically threatening.
I think that's exactly why is because when they do talk to me, if I approach people, they'll talk to me. That's fine. But if they do approach me, I mean, everyone is always coming with an air of, they always make sure that I know that they're being polite and respectful. And, if they say anything that might be taken the wrong way, they'll preface it with, I don't mean this any kind of way. I just wanted to say, more often than not, I get, oh, you drive that truck? You look like you're 12.
I think I even said that.
Yeah. Yeah. I get stopped at the fuel islands all the time. I'll be fueling up my truck and somebody goes walking by me to go inside and they stop and do a double take and
Right. Well, the
uh
reason I asked is just like, so if that opportunity ever presented itself, just speaking of 2 lane roads and sort of 2 lane tourism and all that, you can get a lot of that out west and just not see anybody. As you know, New York's a very highly populated state. Even out in the countryside, there's people everywhere. I tell my friends to come visit me here from Canada or other places. They see all the forest and hills around, and they go, "Oh wow, New York's really beautiful and lush, and there's all this forest everywhere." And I'm like, "Yeah, when you walk in that forest, it's private. Somebody owns it. There's always a house somewhere. Like
hmm
people don't have huge spreads. I mean, a few people do, but like no matter where you go, in amongst all them trees, there's somebody there, right?
yeah.
It's very densely populated. Whereas, you go to Oklahoma, Missouri, the northern plains, Nebraska, the Dakotas. There's not a whole lot of people around, and it's very pretty. And there's like a sort of peace that comes with trucking out there. And I sort of wondered, like, given your attitude, your positive attitude, the way you approach the job, sooner or later, someone's going to come along and say, "Hey, why don't you come work for me?" And, like, given your experience with livestock, tootling around out in the Great Plains seems like something you might want to do someday.
I mean, it's definitely on my radar. I would have to I'd have to really sit down with whoever the owner and the boss is and have a real good conversation with them because if they didn't run things the way that my current boss does, I definitely couldn't. I say I'm spoiled a little bit because I feel like I could never work for anybody else.
Well, you and I are. I hate to say it, like this is not like a brag or anything, but like somewhat exceptional. Again, you missed the legacy carrier, mega carrier program. You operate in a niche industry that still does things sort of old school, and I came up the same way, even though I wasn't hauling livestock. But the people I worked for in Canada have much the same approach to things as your grandpa, by the sounds of it, and Al and I, and I've spent most of my life working that way. I have worked for large carriers. I've worked for a couple here and there, and unfortunately, they lived up to the stereotype. There's problems that come with size, and there's problems that come with the people that get involved at that scale, the sort of type of managers, their liability, their exposure, and that alters how things get done and that alters how they treat drivers. And, I've had discussions with a few people about my own sort of position here. The guy I work for, nice dude, right attitude, not enough money, but I don't think I'm really limited in where I can work. Like you say, I would have to do my due diligence, like you said, long conversation, deep into the weeds of philosophy, operating attitude, you know, because life's too short to work for assholes, and life's too
Yes.
short. Life's too short. Like I'm 44, so there's a difference between you and I now, not only in gender but in age. Once you get to a certain age and you've been doing something for so long, like I have my entire life, it gets less and less probable that I'm going to take orders and or told how to do things from somebody who's A, younger than me, and B, doesn't have the years of experience in the business that I have. So I basically I've shot myself in the foot. Like I can only work for a certain type of person, and that's really limited my options around here. Like I can't, I'm not driving a truck with an ELD in it. I'm not working anywhere that has a safety department or a human resources manager. I'm just not doing it. Full stop. That entire scene is vexatious to my spirit and is the wrong way our society is going. So I'm really not ever going to work for that kind of company. And I can see you're probably going to end up in the same boat that I am.
Yeah, that was actually another part of the reason that I left All Night. Was they got a new camera system. Um,
What?
yeah, they had the
Oh
cameras on the outside, and
no.
then they got a new one that had the driver facing, and they're very, I mean, I do believe them when they say it is truly for safety reasons. They're not trying to spy on you all day long. I know the safety guy real well. When I worked in the shop, he was always in his little office there, and
I'm sure
um,
they believe that, and I'm sure that they've got the sort of system where it only records incidents. That's all well and good, but the principle behind it, right?
yes, yes,
The
and that was a big
the
reason
lack
why I
of
left them.
trust, the lack of trust, the lack of granting you your autonomy as a professional. I'm not buying it. No way. Sorry, that's a line I won't cross.
Yeah, yeah, they got those new cameras. They were also switching from Macs to Fightliners, which I didn't like. Um,
That's
I
a
love my
significant.
Macs through and through.
That's a significant downgrade.
Yes.
And if so, there's a guy on Twitter you probably follow, Jamie Hagan, Hellbent Hagan.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a big Mac guy. You guys should
Yeah.
talk. Who knows? He might try and offer you a job after listening to this.
Um,
He's great. If you want to like learn more about the Mac you're driving now, get fuel efficiency, all of your operational stuff, you talk to Jamie. He's the man.
oh, that's good to know. Most of what I know about my truck beyond the, general truck knowledge is that it's all Mac, all American made parts. Got that gold bulldog on the front.
Yeah, my dad, when I was a kid, my old man drove an R model, a couple of R models for this guy, Stony Creek, Ontario. His name was Jim Townsley. The company, he's no longer with us, but the company he founded is still around. You might see them running across the thruway every now and then. They're called J Line. They do like roll type flatbeds.
Okay.
My dad worked for J Line when there was only like 5 trucks in the early 1980s, and he would drive an old R model with no bunk on it from Ontario all the way out to New Brunswick, hauling coils, and then he would come back with lumber from New Brunswick or northern Quebec somewhere. Sometimes he would go up to Sault Ste. Marie, which is 8 hours north of Toronto. Sometimes Winnipeg, which is 1,300 miles from Toronto, and no bunk, just sleeping across the seats. The old days, old school trucking.
Yeah, I've done a fair share of that with the milk because I picked up from the farms primarily, but then I would also um either I would take the load that I picked up and bring it straight to a plant, or I would come back to the yard and hop out of my pickup trailer and then get into a delivery trailer and take that down to a plant. Yeah, when they installed those cameras, I I was eating a cheeseburger and all of a sudden I hear, "Put down your phone." And it was the cheeseburger in my hand. And then,
So was the
so
was the voice automatic? Was it like just detecting like a particular emotion or something?
yeah, yeah, it has some sort of AI in there that detects it. And then, once I finished my burger and I thought, that's just a fluke. Obviously, if they look at it, they're gonna say, oh, she's just eating. It's fine. And then the way that I hold my steering wheel, because I kind of hold it on the bottom, and I guess it interpreted it as holding my phone in my hand, and it started doing it again, and it was
Oh
like
man.
I would forget, and so I'd put my hand back there because it's habit, it's how I drive, and it would say it again, and finally I flipped off the camera and I said, "Put this down." And then at the next safety meeting, I never had a problem with their safety meetings because they always brought in a big buffet of food, and all we had to do was kind of sit through a little video and
Well,
we
they
got
they
fed.
they, ha- they have to coax you in there with something because otherwise you
Oh
wouldn't show
yeah.
up, right?
Yeah. But at the next safety meeting, I mean, this was the first meeting after they had installed those cameras, and he said, "I know some of you have some choice words and choice hand motions for Phil here." And I just thought, oh, I said it might not just be me. I'm certain I'm not the only one, but
Yeah, there was a gentleman at the place I worked for. One of the reasons I left those guys in Syracuse was just this. I had taken a break from being on the road. I was actually helping a contractor friend of mine here in town, swinging a hammer, doing construction stuff, and then my wife and I got pregnant, and I needed to save a little bit more money. So I thought, all right, well, the only way I know how to make big money is to go trucking. So I
hmm
went to go work for these guys in Syracuse, and unfortunately, they had cameras and they had ELDs before they were law. And I bit the bullet. I thought, you know what? I got a kid coming. I need to make some cash. I haven't, as much as I rail against this stuff, I've never really experienced it before. So whatever, I'll just deal with it. And never again. I fought them tooth and nail on the ELD. That's actually how I ended up getting fired. I've never been fired from a trucking job except them guys in Syracuse, and that's because I was messing with their ELD to try and get around it. They also had a camera in the truck, which they never really got me for anything because, like, I'm a pretty attentive driver. I don't, I've never been in a collision. I've never wrecked a truck. I don't, my driving record's pretty good, and there's a reason for that. So I never had too much issue with the camera other than, like, I couldn't help it. Like, I'm going down the road and this fucking thing is on the windshield staring at me the whole time. And I just know that I'm being
yeah,
watched, and it drove me insane. Just knowing that it was there. Never, like I say, they never busted me for anything with the camera. It just made me nuts knowing the thing was sitting there. So anyway, eventually they fired me. 6 months after they told me I was already the highest paid driver there, and I'd only been working there for 6 months, so I only lasted a year. So I went from zero to highest paid driver in the fleet to fired in 12 months without having gotten an accident, annoyed a customer, being late for a delivery, just fooling around with their ELD, trying to figure out how I can get moving earlier. And that was the end of me.
yeah. The only kind of, I wouldn't say overstep, but one time the safety guy came into me and he said, "I got to talk to you about this," and he pulled up. I guess it was a different system from the ELD, but it ran alongside of it, and it was just like whatever thing that monitored our speed. And he said, "We have a record of you going 88 miles per hour." And these trucks were governed at 67 on the pedals, 69 on the cruise. And I thought 88, I definitely like I've coasted down some hills and maybe hit like 70 or 71, but I definitely have not hit 88. And he pulls it up and it has the location data and it was out in Massachusetts. And I said, I haven't been to Massachusetts in over a month, and this happened like a couple of days ago. I said, I don't know what happened, but that was not me. And it turned out when I logged out of the ELD, for some reason, that secondary system had not logged me out. And so when the next guy got in, he went 88 miles per hour, but it logged it as me doing 88 miles per hour. And I was like, see, this is something you guys got to work out.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem with, like, technology writ large, is that it's fallible, it's not perfect, and they're using it as a replacement for making better people.
hmm
And, I believe your story is that you can find better people and you can make better people. And it's obvious that you were brought up correctly, and, credit to your parents and your grandparents and your community. And you're very forthright and organized, and you have the right attitude. And there's ways that people like you can be made. And I think it's more valuable to make people like you than it is to build fancy gizmos that screw up all the time and treat us like criminals, right? Like that's my project here, is to, scream from the void. People are more important than technology, and managing people with technology it's a poor replacement for just making better people and treating them as such, right?
Yes. It makes me think of you recommended me the book Data Driven, correct?
Yeah, Karen Levy. Yep, I had her on the show. She
Yes.
she lives right here in Ithaca.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah, I listened to it like the next day after you recommended it to me. I listened to it all in one shot, and that was a very, very interesting thing to listen to. I just, like you said, like people are more important and than technology, and they're trying to replace people with technology. And I know part of it is, they think it's going to be cheaper in the long run because they won't have to pay a driver. But I think it is so much more valuable to invest in the community and to invest in the people because how many lives are going to be lost by autonomous trucks that make a mistake?
Well, I mean, they would say the argument that there's lots of accidents with trucks and human drivers, and that's true, but that's a function of how they have the trucking industry and its training programs organized. They don't
Exactly. Yeah.
they could fix that, but that might cost money, and that goes against the sort of transhumanist undercurrent of our zeitgeist that dictates technology rules over us and that humans can be overcome in every facet of life. We can be improved, made better, or the unstated thing is eliminated by
Yep.
technology. And so one of the things about autonomous trucks, like I'm having a hard time picturing an autonomous truck showing up at a guy's dairy farm, backing in, talking to the farmer, getting on top of the lid of the trailer to make sure that it doesn't overfill. There's all these other little things that humans do, and some of that could probably be roboticized away. I'm not a Luddite. Like, technology has its uses, it has its limitations, it has its opportunities. Who knows? Maybe autonomous trucks will come and replace us all. I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm saying it's the less desirable option, and how you treat people between now and when and if that ever happens is very important, because they're treating it as like a sort of fait accompli, and I don't think it is. And you can't, like I say, in the meantime, you still have to deal with people, and we shouldn't just write people off. And like I say, the interactions you have with your customers, I don't know that like a robot's gonna take over a cattle trailer anytime soon. Like,
Yeah.
just yeah, I'm highly skeptical for many reasons how all of this stuff is gonna get rolled out. So you found an audiobook version of Karen's book?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. I have to renew my Audible membership. My brain's been taken over by podcasts for a long time now. But I read it. I actually read that book 3 times. So I had to take a whole lot of notes because I wrote this review of it. And then I finally got to interview Karen, and she's really lovely. I met her in person last summer here in town. We went and had a beer. She's great. I hope we get to do the same thing. Maybe next time you're down in Owego, let me know.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
what else do you listen to while you're going down the road besides Data Driven?
Well, right now making my way through Game of Thrones. I'm almost through the first book. It's 30 hours long or 32 hours.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah. And I kind of hop back and forth between podcasts, books, and music. For podcasts, it's everything from comedy shows to true crime, a lot of true crime, stereotypical girl.
I've never
Uh,
listened to a true crime show. I understand that's one of the most popular genres, but I'm a stick in the mud, and I have a very narrow range of things I listen to. Oh, sue me.
yeah, whenever, I'm driving down the road, I'm getting a little bit like, I don't have much farther to go and I'm getting a little bit tired. That's when I turn on the music and I just crank it up and I'll sing till I lose my voice. But it works.
Oh wow, Laura the singing bullhauler. All right, should take a microphone with you and record it. You never know what people will listen to.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've been encouraged by people to live stream from the cab of my truck, which I have a bunch of different objections to, and I'm probably never going to do. But like, you'd be amazed at what people will sit and watch on YouTube. I would imagine if you like got a GoPro and a half decent mic and you just sang into the camera while you're trundling along in your Mac, you would probably do well on YouTube. I mean, we live in that kind of world now.
Yeah, there's enough people watching that doesn't take much to go viral nowadays.
All right. Well, Laura, we've been going for an hour and a half. I really appreciate your time, but I got to go haul some logs. You probably got to go help with some cows.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it at that. Any parting thoughts? Any comments, suggestions?
I'm just going to bring it back to what my mom said. If I haven't taught you how to teach yourself, I've taught you nothing. And I think anyone can start teaching themselves by learning how to teach themselves. There's a lot of books, a lot of resources on how to do that. And I think if you just know how to look for your resources and your references and kind of deduce for yourself, don't take anything at face value. Always look into things for yourself, even if it's a news source you trust. Read a couple articles on the subject, especially when it comes to trucking, because a lot of people who say they're fighting for truckers, not so much. So look into it, talk to people, and if you're trying to get your CDL, go local. Go local as much as possible.
Right. Wise words. Lora, thank you very much for your time, and happy trails out there. Keep in touch. And you're quite a remarkable young woman. I'm going to recommend you to listen to and be a guest on this other show. There's a friend of mine on Twitter. His name is Rust Belt Kid. He has a podcast called Heartland Revival, which is extolling the virtues of manufacturing and farming. He calls himself a Midwest revivalist. He's all about the Midwest US and sort of local history and the history of farming and manufacturing. And he's got a little podcast project going on. And although New York isn't really Midwest, what you're doing is very Midwest. And I think you'd have a great conversation with him. So I'm gonna send you to him. How do people find you online if they want to find Lora?
I'm on Twitter, Lora Danny Andela. Now I'm gonna have to spell that. It's LoraDaniAndela. I'm on Facebook, but not a whole lot. And I am on Instagram as well. And that's Lora, LORA_Andela, ANDELA. Everything's public because I'm not really on there a whole lot except for Twitter. I've really blown up on there the last couple days, actually.
Yeah, well, I'm sure when people hear the voice behind the tweets and the images, like I say, you're a very remarkable young woman. Thank you for coming on. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, no problem. Way of the road.